Should be rolling now. There we go, we're live. I am sorry about being a bit late. Yeah, apologies about that. Anyways, let's get on to it, shall we? Alright.
Pastor Chris Avell of Dad's Place, a church in Bryan, is facing 18 zoning code violations. He appeared in court Thursday.
On behalf of my client, we would enter a plea of not guilty.
We'll see, but I'm praising God that, at least as of now, if I'm understanding correctly, the people can stay.
Dad's Place opened its doors 24 hours a day last March to anyone in need of a place to rest or get out of the cold. The church is located next door to a county homeless shelter, but often takes in those the shelter cannot help.
We're disappointed with the city that they would take that extra measure. There are multiple attorneys on this case. Mayor Schlade and anyone from the city could have come and talked to any one of us at any time.
Last November, Pastor Avell said the Bryan City Zoning Commission told him Dad's Place, which does not have bedrooms, could no longer house the homeless. A court filing states the building is zoned as central business and people are not allowed to eat, wash clothes, or sleep on the property. In a statement released in December, the chief of Bryan Police told 13 Action News, in part, a reasonable amount of time was given for both the tenant and property owner to fix the issues. Due to the safety of all involved, the city moved forward with filing charges.
So my concern would be, hey, let's make sure we're representing Christ well in all this. We're a church, this is what we do.
Why is this church being hit with criminal charges just because they're keeping their doors open to serve the community? I'm Stuart Shepard, and this is First Liberty Live. We are here in Bryan, Ohio, and we're at Dad's Place. So this is Pastor Chris Avell, who's watching over this congregation. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Just want to talk to you about the work that you do here first, and then we'll get to the problems with the criminal charges that have come up against you. First, tell me about Dad's Place. What's this congregation like?
Well, it's a congregation of people who love Jesus from all walks of life, and we have people who come to the door who've never heard the gospel, and we share the gospel with them, and we have people who've been following Jesus for years. So we're a church, and we're here to do Christ's work, so that's what we are.
Not that long ago, you decided the best thing to do is to keep the doors open 24 hours a day. Why'd you make that decision?
Well, God had put it on our heart before we even opened, before we even started Dad's Place, and it was just the right time. We were getting more and more calls in the middle of the night for someone who had a need, and some other things going on. We just prayed about it and said, now's the time. This is the time God has called us, and He'd equipped us to be able to do it. And so we opened up 24 hours in March of 2023.
And to be clear, it's not a shelter in that there aren't beds here, but it is a place for people to come in out of the weather and just a place to be safe, right?
Yeah. My Lord says, come to me all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And not just rest as the world gives, but rest for your souls. And so we thought, hey, what a great thing that people can come in 24/7 and experience the true rest that only God can provide.
I was alone for a long time after my husband died, and we lost our house because I didn't have it. I was living on $365 a month after my husband died to support my son and I. And we were alone, and then came in here, and then we're not alone anymore. That's one of the things. The other is that at one time I was living in Columbus near Ohio State, and a man came in to rape me. Dead to rights. But, God told me what to do, and I was fine, but the fear built in. But here, I'm not afraid. I can sleep right here. The doors is unlocked, and I know that the brothers here won't let anybody touch me.
Most people go to church on just, Sunday, and then they hardly ever see the people the rest of the week, so it's nice to be able to come back and actually get to know them better, as opposed to just seeing them every
year ago, January 3rd, we were walking the streets of Bryan, Ohio, and basically
cold,
broken,
pouring rain,
and we met
the first night out on the streets in a broken down container.
And we met with Pastor Chris and found not only our spiritual leader, but found God in the process, and it has been I don't even know how to say it. It's
been a blessing.
It's a blessing, and it's a family. Mm-hmm. And it's been a very amazing year. It's been very ups and downs, but God's doing His thing, and we are here 100% full force in respect for Pastor Chris.
You walk in these doors, you come as you are. You're accepted as you are. You're welcome. You feel welcome. It's a church, but it's a family, and you immediately get that connection. You know what I mean? It's different from just, I grew up in churches my whole life, and I lost my walk with Jesus for a long time. And coming back here was the first time I was actually able to realize that I turned my back. Jesus didn't turn his back on me. I turned my back. And the trials and tribulations that I was going through, Jesus was there with me the whole time. And he brought me here in these doors to realize that and to see that. And without coming here to Dad's place, I would have never reconnected that, and I would still be very lost.
And I've been around Dad's since 2018. And it does wonders for people. I've seen so many different things happen. I've seen lives change. And without Chris and this place, and mainly without the man upstairs, God himself, I mean, it would be rough.
I have no real connection with my 5 adult kids, but I've got family here. Not a few, but everyone who's here, whether they're the newest one who came through the door or whether they've been here, as Robert said, for the entire time. And God's presence is just so unmistakable.
Where would these people go if it wasn't open? They'd be out on the streets. I mean, yes, they can go in their cars, but it's not the same as being inside out of the cold, or, you know, where else would they go?
And something I've heard you say that really stood out to me, and it's simply this. When we say worship in the modern church, we think of drums and guitars and keyboards and singers and all that. But you go back to a verse that says what true worship is. Tell me about that.
Yeah, taking care of widows and orphans. And it's very clear in Scripture, you know, there's this, in Scripture, Jesus says to some of his followers, he goes, hey, you know, when I was a stranger, you let me in. When I was thirsty, you gave me a drink. When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was a prisoner, you visited me, all these things. And man, we give gifts to those we love. And God gave us the greatest gift when he sent his son, Jesus, to die for us. And I want to give him good gifts. And that's the way I can give God gifts. That's the way I can worship him, is by caring for the least of these. And that's what he said. He said, anything you did for the least of these, you did for me. And so this is about me worshiping my God. This is about me showing my love to Jesus by doing what he's commanded me to do. He says, if you love me, you will keep my commands. And so that's what we try to do here at Dad's Place.
Okay, let's get into the legal part just a bit. And I've got Ryan Gardner here, who is an attorney with us at First Liberty. I'm going to drill him here in just a moment, so your time is coming. But first, tell me about when the 18 criminal charges showed up. Give us a picture of what that was like when suddenly someone came in the door and said, here you go.
Well, I actually would have preferred it came that way originally, because I didn't find out about it till a friend had called and said, hey, what's going on at Dad's Place? And I was embarrassed to say, I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, well, it's in the front page of the paper. You're being charged with 18 charges, and kind of laid down. I said, well, I'll get right over there. I don't know. And so it's quite embarrassing. But, you know, I'll tell you this, as you talk to Ryan here, God is so good. And he answered a prayer, because my prayer, I don't know what to do with this. You know, I'm not a legal guy. And but I prayed that he'd send me some legal counsel that knew him and loves him and would be praying for me first and foremost. And God delivered. That's what he does. So I'm thankful Ryan's here, and Jeremy, Lisa, and the others of the team.
Yeah. Ryan, let's talk about this from a legal perspective. This, on the face of it, if I were just a news reporter, it's a zoning dispute. But there's so much more going on here than that.
There's absolutely so much more than to a simple zoning dispute here. I have never seen a pastor get criminally charged. I'll repeat that again just for emphasis. Criminally charged with just doing the work that the church does, caring for the needy, loving those who have no one else to love them, and seeking and saving the lost. That is all that Pastor Chris is trying to do here, but the city doesn't want him to do it here. To the city, the people here are the problem, and these people here need to go somewhere else. That is what this is truly about at the heart of it.
And the key to me, and today is we're here, temperatures in the 30s, we had snow overnight, more on the way tonight. The alternative is to say, oh, instead of being here, within the safe shelter of this place, and I'm using shelter in the broad sense, but a warm place to be, they're saying, no, you'd be better off on the street out in the cold.
That's exactly right. If the city has its way, Pastor Chris is going to be in jail, and they want these people on the streets because they have nowhere else to go. The city keeps saying, take them somewhere else. Where are they to go? Pastor Chris has a great relationship with the homeless shelter that is right next door, but the thing is that that place fills up. And when that place is full, where are these people supposed to go? There is nowhere. And the city isn't doing anything to help these people out. And so if the church doesn't step in to do that, who's going to do it?
What's First Liberty doing with this case?
We are going to fight for Pastor Chris all the way on this case. What the city is doing here is unconscionable, and it is trampling his rights under the First Amendment, federal law, Ohio law. There are so many different levels of violations here, and it is completely unlawful what the city has done. And they have made it their mission to humiliate and harass this man all along the way. We talked about him being served papers. We at First Liberty tried to save him from even having to be served. We were in discussions with the city to waive service. But instead of talking with us, his attorneys, the city went around our back and served Pastor Chris on Sunday morning as he was coming in to preach the gospel. And on top of that, they tried to deprive him of counsel. This morning we were at the courthouse at his arraignment. Twice the city prosecutor tried to force Pastor Chris to go to court without the representation of counsel.
What's victory look like?
Victory looks a lot like what's going on here right now. Dad's place is open 24/7 and is able to love those who need it most, to care for those who need it the most, and most important of all, share the good news of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Chris, I have to ask, some people would say, why don't you just do services on Sunday? You don't need to do all this. Why is your heart in this? Why do you care so much about the folks behind us here?
Well, I sincerely believe we're commanded to do this to our ability. And so churches all over the country, including here in Bryan, Ohio, do this. And, but this is what God has called us to do and equipped us to do. And I don't believe it's an option. I believe it's a command. And I love God, and so I keep his commands the best I can. I'm a sinner. We all fall short of the glory of God. But I keep it the best I can. And this is who we are. We're a family. These are my brothers and sisters according to Christ. And so I treat them like family because we are family.
Anything else you'd like to share before I let you go?
No, just a reminder, because it's important to me, that I love my city. This is our city. We love our city. And we know, we're a church, we know our battle isn't against flesh and blood. It's against the spiritual powers of darkness in this world, those governmental authorities of the enemy, let's say. And so, but I'm thankful that I have counsel like Ryan and Jeremy and Lisa and others who are here to step in and fill that gap with things I don't know how to deal with, right? Because God sent them as well. God uses all people. So I'm real thankful to have some of these guys here. I really appreciate it.
Well, we are honored to work alongside you. We're going to fight with you, and not fight with you, but fight alongside you. I want to make sure I say that right. I don't want to get in a...
Sometimes I need to be beaten up a little. That's okay. I know, for real. So
we're going to be fighting alongside you all the way till we win this thing. So we're very proud of you and the stand that you're taking. We're going to be with you the whole way.
Pastor, to you, your church is not allowed to take in the homeless. Kind of conundrum here, because they're saying you don't have beds, but you're not allowed to have beds. So because you don't have beds, you can't have homeless staying in there overnight. It seems unbelievable that they want the people outside in the cold versus inside the church.
Yeah, well, last year we made the decision to keep our church doors open 24/7. We had opened during extreme heat and extreme cold before to allow people in, and it's kind of this idea, we believe that anyone who's weary and burdened, they can come and find rest, and we believe it's true rest, like rest for their souls. And as a church, we believe we're commanded to take care of those in need. It's not optional. And it's our mission to show Christ's love to even those the world rejects, like people who God loves them, but that's our belief, right? He loves them so much, he sent his son Jesus to rescue anyone who turns to him in faith. We believe that. And in November, the city delivered a letter. They actually posted a sign outside the church kind of saying you have 10 days to get the people out and stop this ministry. And I just can't do that. I have to follow Christ, and the people who stay, they stay because they have nowhere else to go. I mean, that's no one wants to stay in a church
but they have nowhere else to go. We're the church. We won't send them away. And so, unfortunately, the city doesn't agree, and they filed 18 criminal charges against me. And but I'm convinced, Trace, that the church is not just called to teach and preach, but to feed the hungry, welcome the stranger, visit the prisoner, clothe the naked, care for the widow and the orphan. That's what the Bible says, and it matters to me because I believe that everything we do for Jesus. That's what I believe.
Chris, you're a good man. Now to you, Jeremy, because the chief of Bryan Police told Action News, quoting here, a reasonable amount of time was given for both the tenant and property owner to fix the issues. Due to the safety of all involved, the city moved forward with filing charges to fix the issues, to put beds in a place you can't. I don't get, there's no remedy, there's no fix.
No, I want folks to think about this for a second. If you're a pastor, think about driving up to your church on Sunday morning like Pastor Avell did this past Sunday morning, getting out of your car to find a squad car pulling up beside you, and out pops a police officer and hands you 18 different criminal charges for the offense of caring for the homeless in the dead of winter. That's what it's come to. It's not enough for the city of Bryan, Ohio to castigate them on a civil basis for failing to abide by this, that, or the other thing. They've already violated the law in that regard. We're going to hold them accountable for that. But to then tell the pastor and to hold him criminally responsible for daring to take care of the homeless in the frigid winter, they would rather kick these folks to the curb in the cold outdoors of December and early January than allow the church to remain a church open 24/7 to those who need it the most. It's unconscionable. I've seen a lot of things at firstliberty.org, but this takes the cake.
This is taking the cake. Pastor, you get a new charge every day that you allow the homeless. Is it worth it? Will you keep going?
Absolutely. I have no choice. I mean, honestly, I can't say this is about God. It's about his love for the poor, for the marginalized, for people like me who have fallen short, are in desperate need of help. God gave me a love for them, Trace, because he first loved me. You know, I wasn't always a believer. I used to be an atheist. And this is what God did for me. I was spiritually homeless, and he provided a home for me in heaven. I believe that. And Trace, he's put a burden on my heart for them. Many of these people, they've been rejected by their families. They've been cast aside by their communities. So if the church isn't willing to lay down her life for them, who will? Like, this is what we're called to do. And I can't help it because I believe this is the mission of the church, to make disciples. And this is how we do it, by showing the love of Christ, preaching the truth, and laying down our lives in service and in humility as Christ laid down his life for us. That's what I believe.
Yeah. Again, I reiterate, you're a good man, Pastor Chris Avell, Jeremy Dice. Best of luck on your fight. We will keep checking in with you to find out how this is going, and we wish you all the best of luck.
Pastor, you are facing 18 criminal charges for violating your city's zoning laws, and so we'll start there. Can you tell us what led to this?
Well, we opened in, I believe it was March, we opened our doors 24/7. So we decided as a church, again, from the beginning, before we had opened the church, this was the vision to eventually open 24/7. And in March, just through some things God had done and what we were seeing, we decided that was time. It was time to do it so that people can come in day or night and find true rest, come in and pray at any time of day. We had been also getting a lot of calls from the city, like the police. We get calls all the time, 2, 3 in the morning. Maybe someone had a domestic dispute and they needed somewhere to cool off or something like that. And so this was a way we could assist that. And so we opened up 24/7, and that kind of led into the violations, which I can, again, let Ryan talk about that. But
yeah. Can I ask you this? Because it's interesting. You mentioned there that the police, would even call you for help, because here's this church, this center where people can come, as you were saying, to cool off, or if there are homeless people looking for refuge, especially in cold temperatures, this becomes a place. And I know that you opened 24/7, I believe, in the summer, but now we're moving into these colder months. If the police were calling and they're, forwarding people to you, now you've run into a problem with the authorities here, it sounds like. And so it's interesting, and we could talk about that in a moment, but when it comes to what you've seen over the last few months as a result of being open 24 hours, what are some of the positive developments you've seen in the community as a result of what you've been offering there.
Well, first and foremost, from my perspective, we've seen many who, if we were not open 24 hours, this wouldn't happen. Many come to faith in Christ. I mean, we're a church, so that's our thing, right? Is
sure
faith in Christ and following Christ, and so for us that's paramount. And so that's, I mean, we've seen many come to Christ, and from a more, let's say, practical city perspective, I firmly believe that everyone who walks through the doors of the church walks out a better citizen. Like I just mean this. I really believe this. You can't walk in the place and not experience the love of Christ, even if you just walk through the doors for a few minutes. It's just what we're called to be is the hands and feet of Jesus, and I believe we do that. And so I'll give a quick, if you want, a story of maybe a more practical nature. We had this guy, this cool guy, Morgan. He came in, and his bride-to-be, Marilyn, came in, and Morgan was an absolute disaster. He'll use those words, so I could use them freely. And he basically he'll tell you that Dad's place saved his life. Of course, now we're talking about Christ at work through Dad's place. We can't take credit, but he was on drugs and alcohol and just a mess in every way. Has a lot of severe mental health issues. Is a veteran, young guy, but he and his wife were looking for a place, and they actually happened to call the police department in Bryan. The Bryan Police Department recommended, hey, why don't you call Pastor Chris at Dad's place? And they came in. He confessed Christ, just caught on fire for God. He's been a part of us baptizing people, and it's just incredible the change in his life. He's been clean and sober. His wife to be, his bride to be, Marilyn, works helping disabled people in the community. Like, that's her job, So that's just one story, but there's been so many fantastic stories. We have another family here with us who their dad died of COVID. So right when the pandemic was hitting strong, and then a couple years later, so just this past year, their mom died, and they're from a local town called Edgerton, and very, very involved in the community. Almost everyone in Edgerton knows their name. And when their mom died, one of the brothers took ownership of the house, and that's great. And so some of the other family had to leave, and there was just no housing for them. Like, they cannot find housing. They work. He's worked at the bank for 8 years. Jamie's his name, and his sister works as a caretaker. And they just couldn't find any place. So they stayed at the homeless shelter. We're actually right next door to a homeless shelter. They stayed there for a bit. And frankly, the homeless shelter is always over full. So what happens is, when you have the tangible means, the money, frankly, to be on your own, they kind of say, hey, we just need you to move on because we have people who can't afford a place. And so Jamie had to leave, but he could not find a place. I mean, it's not like he didn't try. Again, he's been employed at the bank for 8 years. He has money saved up and just couldn't find a place to stay. So he came next door, and he's been a part of our family. I've known him for years. So there's just many stories of what God's doing there. But my favorite one is the salvations, because that's what impacts my heart. And seeing a life transformed.
That's your business. Well, that's your business, right?
I tell you, when you see a life transformed by Christ, I don't know how much you know my story, and I know this is not the time for it, but I was an atheist, and I really, really was convinced there was no God. I love sharing that story because I was convinced, and God got me, and he made me aware that I was the walking dead, and I just have never been the same since. And it's like whenever you experience something amazing, right? You want everyone to experience it. That's why we share when we have an amazing experience in life. If you go to a good restaurant, what do you tell people? You got to try this out.
Tell everybody about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And man, I've tasted and seen that the Lord is good, and I just can't help myself from telling people about it. I really can't. I mean, God is just amazing. And so that's our heart as a church, is like, hey, come in and meet God, and you will never be the same. And so, sorry for making a quick question a long answer.
No, that's a good long answer because you gave us stories that practically show how the church is being relied upon and used. And it really brings me, Ryan, to you and wanting to sort of understand. I mean, these zoning stories, we hear of them quite often. It does often happen with churches. It's interesting to me, Ryan, that the police are calling, and I don't know that if it's the same police officers or the same departments, calling and forwarding people there and asking for help. And now there's a legal problem with the authorities. Can you explain, legally speaking, what is going on here with the zoning laws?
It's a head scratcher for me as well. Here, the police were referring people to Dad's place, and everything was okay until it wasn't. And what happened is in November, they got a letter saying that they had to shut their doors and had to put these people with nowhere else to go on the streets. And you've heard the pastor talk about these people and his love for them, and he just couldn't do that. And so when he kept operating this ministry, help care for the most needy and hurting in his community, the city came down on him with 18 criminal charges. And I'll say that the criminal aspect here is highly unusual. In fact, I've never seen anything like this. I've seen cities come after churches in the civil context when it comes to zoning issues, but to try to hold a pastor criminally liable and even put him in jail for simply
what
caring
is
for
the
homeless.
jail time on this? What is the jail time potential on, like, let's say he's found guilty of all 18 of these charges?
I believe that each charge carries like a 6-month jail time option plus a fine on top of that. So depending upon how aggressive the prosecution wants to be, you're talking about 18 counts. I mean, it could be 6 months, it could be a year. It could, if they really want to try to be aggressive, it could be multiple years. And the prosecution has said that every day that he continues to keep his doors open is another violation. And so more charges could very well be coming in the future.
And are the doors currently open as we're speaking still, Pastor?
Yes.
So just, I don't want to be overly specific on this, but I think it's an important detail. Are the same authorities, the same departments that were calling and connecting people to you, are they the same ones who have now been tasked with coming after you?
Yes.
Ryan, what do you think it is that changed? I mean, there wasn't a lot of time here. I did read a quote from an authority who had said, there was plenty of time for them to make the changes and the updates that we asked for. But if I'm not mistaken here, you opened this over the summer. You found out about these charges in November. That's not a lot of time. So Ryan, can you speak to that a little bit of what you think maybe changed in that time frame?
It's hard to say exactly, but it seems to me that somebody in the city is hostile to this ministry and doesn't want it there. And maybe we're looking at a situation where a city official is thinking this is a not in my backyard kind of situation, and you can do your ministry, but you just can't do it right here. That's an inconvenience for us. But the First Amendment protects the right of Dad's place to operate his ministry wherever God has called us to do so. And in this case, God has called Dad's place to operate exactly where it is. And as you've heard from the pastor's stories, God is working there, and Dad's place just wants to continue operating and continue helping. The city, frankly, should be walking alongside them and helping them to accomplish this goal because these people have nowhere else to go. And if the church doesn't step in, who's going to do it?
So, Ryan, one more question for you on this. What are the specific things that the authorities of the city is asking for, and are they things that could easily be done? If they were to be done, would this go away? Just kind of take us through some of those details.
As I understand it, the only thing that's going to make the city happy is if they put those people out on the streets and get them out of the church. There is no remedy short of that. There is no sort of tweaking something here and there to comply with fire code, from what I understand. What the city wants is for people to stop sleeping in the church, eating in the church, and doing their laundry in the church. Those are the three things that the city officials have highlighted over and over again in each of the city charges: sleeping, eating, washing clothes, which really just goes back to caring for people with needs, meeting both their spiritual and their physical needs.
Pastor, What was your initial reaction when this went from, hey, we're forwarding people to you, hey, this is a great community thing, to suddenly having this, relationship with the authorities that was very different from that? What was the initial reaction you had to that?
Humiliated. I was humiliated. I said it before, because I first found out the criminal charges came because a colleague, let's say a fellow pastor, contacted me and said, hey, what's going on with Dad's place? And I was embarrassed because I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And he goes, well, it's on the front page of the paper. You've been charged with 18 crimes. And I hadn't read the paper. I had been served. And so it came as a shock to me. So it's quite humiliating and embarrassing. But then, of course, if I can be frank, it's a blessing, because I truly believe what Jesus says, and that's follow him, and there's going to be persecution, and that's a blessing. And my responsibility is to respond with the grace of Jesus, to love my neighbors well, to remember my battle is not against flesh and blood, to step aside and allow my counsel, like Ryan and the others who are involved, to do their job, and to be patient and wait on the Lord as he works through even the courts. I believe that God works even through the courts. And I can frankly say that the persecution that has come has done what God promises. It's only served to advance the gospel. Paul says that about being in prison. He's like, being in chains has only served to advance the gospel. And I've had letters from people who saw the story and said they were kind of losing faith, that there was still compassion, that God was still on the move out there, and they regained faith. We just, as Ryan knows, because I couldn't help but share it, we had a gentleman in the church last night who came in as part of our 24-hour ministry who had told me, never, ever will I believe in your God. And last night he surrendered. And it's cool. I was talking to a friend, and it was kind of like a Zacchaeus story, because he contacted some parents he was estranged from and thanked them for how they raised him, and just this amazing change in his heart. And I'm just so thankful I get to witness all this. My goal.
So you have no plans. You have no plans to back down on this, right? You have no plans at this point to stop the ministry despite the case going on.
Well, my plan is just to follow God's will wherever that leads. I can't see any other way. And I'll say this for me personally, if that's appropriate. I simply can't stop doing what I believe God's called me to do. It's not in my capability, if that makes sense. Like, I get it when Paul says that you can't credit me, right, for preaching the gospel. I'm compelled. Like, I can't help it. Like, God he first loved me, and he put this love in my heart for others, and I can't help myself. It's not like it's not. Remember, again, going back, Billy, I was an atheist. And so this is not anything I pictured doing in my life. This wasn't I didn't grow up thinking I'm going to help the homeless, or I'm going to preach at a church, or, this was not at all in my sphere of thinking. But God transformed me. I mean, I am born again. He gave me a new life. And I just can't help but share that good news. I can't contain it. But it's more than just speaking it, right? We're not, right? Don't just love each other with words, but in deed and in truth. And so part of my loving others, not just letting them know I love them by coming out here and saying I love them, but living out that love as Christ lived out his love for me, so much so that he was willing to die for me, a sinner, so that I could have eternal life in him. That's incredible, right? That's an incredible story. My story pales in comparison, but I'm here to share his story.
Well, let me ask you the tough question, because and I'm sure you've heard this, and there's going to be people who say it. As a Christian, there are people who will say, both inside the church and outside of the church, the law says this, and you should be, as a Christian pastor, following the law, regardless of whether you agree. What do you say to those people who I'm sure you've heard from already?
Well, I'll say this, and Ryan, keep me in check, right? But I believe I am following the law. Certainly. Like, I don't believe I'm, Romans 13 and those, it's like, certainly we're not here to rebel against the law, and so I'll talk from it scripturally, just so people understand. We can go in Corinthians, go other places and say, hey, slaves, obey your master, right? And we understand the principle behind it. We certainly wouldn't go to someone in in an enslaved country, they still exist, where people are in slavery, and say, hey, by the way, obey your master, in that context, like if your master is brutal and abusive, right? It's about representing God in all you do. And when people bring Bibles into China, can I say that? But I've heard it's true, right? We don't say Romans 13. You don't bring those Bibles into China. We don't do that. We understand that the law of God was how we're to love our neighbor. That was right. The 10 Commandments, they're how we express God's love to others. And so I believe that's what we're doing. We're expressing God's love to others. I do not believe we're in violation of any law. We are a church open 24/7. And as far as I know, there's no law against that, being open 24/7. And we are doing the mission of the church. We are not a homeless shelter. We just are a church that's open 24/7. And unless we have a biblical reason to ask someone to leave, we don't ask them to leave. So hopefully that's right and true. And I answered well, but that's my view on it.
And I'll just affirm everything that he said as well, that his actions are fully protected by the First Amendment, by federal law, and Ohio law for that matter. What the people who are violating the law here are the city, whose actions, quite frankly, are unconscionable. The way that they have humiliated this man, the way that they are continually harassing him, to make a pastor, to cast him as a criminal, is just wrong.
So it was quite shocking, I'd say, and humiliating. And I didn't understand it, because my faith requires we sit down at the table as friends and work out things between one another. And if that can't happen, we take those next steps.
This is not evidence of a city who is keen on partnering with this church and ensuring that it can go forward. This is clear evidence that the city is wanting to drive this church out of the city of Bryan, Ohio.
And we believe that this is actually how we worship, because that's what Jesus says. He says, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. And so we believe this is core to who we are, to worship God.
This is Chris Avell, the pastor of Dad's Place in Bryan, Ohio, who was arraigned in court earlier this month for charges related to building code violations. The basic idea being that he was sheltering the unhoused in the building where his religious services happen, and it is, of course, not coded for that. It's not intended to be a residence, and so now he is being harassed for that. He has pleaded not guilty to the alleged violations, and we'll give you more details, but you need to understand the context. Remember, he was just arraigned. He'd been doing this for a few months. It is the depth of a freezing winter there. And he talks about how these people potentially risked either damage to their health, maybe death in the cold Ohio winter. And instead, he was providing them with shelter, which I feel like is an obligation if you're a religious leader. That's kind of core to most of these religions. It's not letting people just die on the street when you can help them. But as a result of that, he broke 18 restrictions in zoning codes and apparently fire code violations. And so he is now filing a countersuit against the city and against some of the officials in charge of that. He says he'd been doing this, sheltering up to about 8 unhoused people per night at his church without incident, 4 months. And so, there wasn't an actual problem. Why is he being attacked for this? I'm curious, David, what you think about this.
8 people, that's not even like a sleepover with your kids. I mean, that's pretty small. So it sort of underscores that, look, no good deed ever goes unpunished, I suppose, especially in Ohio. We did a video on Rebel HQ not that long ago about a guy who was feeding the homeless in, I think it was Oakland or maybe Sacramento, and he was doing it near a library, because that's where a lot of them were sort of gathered. But because the police had wanted him to do it sort of near a jail where a lot of people didn't trust the police, then they started passing out tickets to this guy who was feeding the homeless. It's sort of mind-boggling. And it reminds me that I had a great boss a while back who said, look, don't just come to me with, criticism, come to me with solutions. If somebody had gone to this pastor and said, look, you're breaking code, here's what we're going to do, though, to help these 8 people, 8 people, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put them here, we're going to put them there. Okay, I'm sure they could have reached some sort of reasonable accommodation and everybody would have been happy. But when you simply just pound somebody who's doing good and say, you're breaking code and you're not, that it's just like it loses your faith in humanity. And good for this, this pastor to try to stand up for himself and to countersue. I wish him well.
Yeah, I wish him well. I don't know what his odds are of, being able to beat the system in this way. And he has also talked about how, like, part of the system sort of was in favor of this. He says some of the unhoused people were brought by police. The local hospital would bring people. So he was just sort of like helping out, kind of like being directed to do so. And now, they don't want him to do that. But then also they're moving the goalposts on him. So you talked about like coming to some sort of accommodation. So he says he's been trying to do that. Like they told him he needed to install a hood over the stove in the church's kitchen. So he did it. And then the city said that the hood wasn't sufficient and they had to have the state come and inspect it. Like there's a little petty bureaucracy here. And what's interesting about this, and I could be proven wrong. In fact, I hope that I'm proven wrong. This is a religious leader who is willing to defy an at least arguably tyrannical government that is bureaucracying him to death, and he's standing up for his values against this system. Why is he not being profiled on Fox News?
Right. Yeah,
and he's
Fox
not,
News,
by the way.
Yeah, why isn't Fox News leading the effort to defend religious liberty and values and encourage the audience of Fox to find homes for these people and to help this guy? Yeah, it should be a big story, and particularly in a place. But I think what's the flip side of this is I have a feeling that this is perhaps not a very well-to-do town in Ohio, and that people don't like the homeless, and they don't want to somehow enable the homeless to continue living there, and that's what that pastor is somehow doing. And so it's part of the looking down on homeless people, not wanting to help, feeling like maybe this pastor is sticking his thumb up in the air, and they're trying to pound him down. And instead, this Ohio town could be like celebrated by the entire nation if it would do the right thing and say, we're going to help this pastor. Instead of criticizing him, instead of charging him with various code violations, we're actually going to build a shelter or take an abandoned building and convert it and make it a place where the homeless can go because we welcome them. Instead, you go after the pastor. What a horrible reputation.
Yeah, granted, I'm an atheist or whatever, so maybe a Christian can give me a better example, but I don't know if I can come up with a thing that is more fundamentally what I was at least led to believe Christianity was about than helping people who literally don't have shelter not freeze to death. And Fox News is against this. And again, because he's helping the unhoused. And the unhoused have always been stigmatized against and have always been victimized in America. But the last few years, it has gotten way worse. I mean, you have hosts who, like, half of their political personality, Jesse Waters, is demonizing the unhoused on a daily basis. And Trump does it too. And they love fantasizing about setting up camps in the middle of the desert to just ship these people to. Sorry, I call them people. Obviously, these hosts don't think of them as people. And so it doesn't matter if this guy is doing what the Bible or what is God or what Jesus commands of him. He's helping bad people. And that's why he's not going to get any support.
And by the way, you know who else was homeless? Baby Jesus. And you know what else was probably not up to code? The manger. I mean, look, I'm not even Christian, but you can go there and say, well, if this is the example, then let's take it back into history. Anyway, that's another 100%. Rabbit hole.
Yeah, that manger needed a hood over the sheep pen, okay? And it wasn't a code. Anyway, okay, with that said, jokes aside, is there something we can do to help him out? I'm assuming he's getting help. It's a national story now, but like, if Chris Avell or a person affiliated with him sees this, I would love to have him on the show to talk about this. Maybe we can get some help to him and his church. There are the unhoused that are suffering there right now. But then also, maybe we could try to inspire a little bit of consistency in these values with right-wing Christians who think that the entire point of Christianity is to buy a private jet for a mega church pastor or something. I feel like arguably there are other things that are as important. Anyway, and by the way, I don't even know this dude's politics. For all I know, he's a huge right-winger. I honestly don't even know. Just in this case, he's doing the right thing.
Dad's place is located next to a homeless shelter, but overcrowding at the facility led Avell to begin offering space to unhoused people. Quote, we have put in things people can use, like a shower and a small ability to do laundry. The pastor told the Village Reporter in Bryan, some who found this to be a home for them have stuck around. Ashton Pittman, editor of the Mississippi Free Press, said Avell's story was a rare example in the U.S. of actual religious persecution of a Christian by the state. So let's think about this here for a second. All the time, we see, let's keep it real, fake scandals in this country around Christianity. Like, for example, the whole war on Christmas narrative. We've all been around for those, where Fox News acts like, you know, the world is ending because at some Walmart somewhere somebody said Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas. We've all seen this. We've all seen the religious right freak out over gender-neutral bathrooms. We've seen them freak out over pro-choice laws. There was obviously the big freak out over gay marriage when we first got gay marriage. You have all these things, these religious issues, where the religious right is crowing at the top of their lungs about how unfair everything is and about how biased everything is against them, about how they're such victims. Here you have an example of a Christian doing the most Christian thing imaginable, saving the lives of homeless people. By the way, it got as cold as negative 20 degrees. Negative 20 degrees in Ohio. He said, hey, you're going to die if I don't let you in. He let them in, gave them a warm place, gave them a meal, and then jackbooted thugs from the state come in and issue him basically 18 zoning violations, which actually does come with a significant penalty. I think they lay it out here. Let's keep going. Avell's attorney, Jeremy Diss, called the city's prosecution of the pastor unconscionable. The city would rather kick these folks out to the curb in the cold outdoor months of December and early January than allow the church to remain open 24/7 to those who need it the most. Avell's story garnered national attention as bitterly cold weather was expected across much of the country, including Ohio. Causey noted that Avell was charged days before Milwaukee officials began investigating at least 3 homeless people's possible deaths from hypothermia when the area was experiencing extreme cold. So in other words, homeless people were dropping dead like flies because of the cold weather. And they still decided to go prosecute this guy simply for being a good person, simply for being a good Christian. Homeless shelters fill up this time of year as the people seek refuge from the bitter cold. While shelters do their best to ensure no one ends up in the cold, people often get frustrated and tough it out on the street. Avell saw a problem. He addressed the issue by helping 100 people and is now facing criminal charges. The nation's homeless population grew sharply by 12% in 2023, with nearly 654,000 without housing. A combination of the cold, growing unhoused population, and lack of housing shelters is the reason why charges against Avell must be dropped. Avell has said he plans to continue housing the homeless population in his church this winter. 2 days after his arraignment, as more cold weather was expected, Dad's Place posted on his Facebook page a notice inviting anyone who could use a warm place to walk right in and enjoy hot coffee, cocoa, soup in our heated building. Stop in to warm up or stay as long as you need, read the Post. So they don't lay out in this article, but I read a different article. There's an actual penalty. This isn't like a little slap on the wrist. This isn't like a, hey, here's a fine of $27.52. This is like, no, there's real consequences for this if you do it. So here's my question to you. Why the hell is this not the biggest story in America right now? If we can have the religious right gin up panic and a victim narrative around stuff like equal rights for gay people, this isn't one where you can get the entire religious right and every single left-wing Christian and secular humanist in the entire country, anybody with a conscience, to say, well, what the fuck are we doing here? Because literally what the state is saying is zoning laws are more important than human lives. That is literally the argument they're making. I told you, 3 homeless people already dropped dead because of the cold. They're saying zoning laws are more important than human lives. This is an example of actual religious persecution. I would say this violates this person's freedom of religion. Absolutely. Because what they're saying is, the way I practice my religion is to be more like Jesus. This is something Jesus would do, and you're going to knock me for zoning violations when I'm saving human lives? It also goes to show you how dehumanized homeless people are in this country. They're that dehumanized that even a religious institution can't offer a helping hand without getting the state cracking down on them. So look, this should be one of the biggest stories in the country. God bless this guy who's a true Christian. Very rarely do you see stories of Christians who are actually trying to be like Jesus. Right? Very rarely do you see that. Usually it's yelling about some trans thing or some gay thing or some anti-abortion thing. This is the loudest voice in the room for Christians, and it's been for decades. Here we have an example of somebody actually abiding by the message of Jesus, looking out for the poor, the sick, the downtrodden, the left behind, the immigrant, or as they say, the sojourner in the Bible. This is a true Christian. This guy's a hero, man. This guy's a hero. This guy deserves all the credit in the world, and Ohio better drop these damn charges. Could you imagine this guy get some sort of serious punishment for saving the lives of homeless people? Again, I don't know why this isn't the biggest story in the country. This is one where seemingly everybody can agree, from the religious right to the left. But here's the sad reality, and let's call it what it is. Let's call a spade a spade. The religious right doesn't give a fuck. If anything, the religious right might agree with the state here. Because we all know the religious right is the furthest thing from embodying Jesus' message of looking out for the downtrodden. They're all about order and hierarchy and dominance. We know what it is. We know what it is. If the religious right was actually serious about believing in Jesus' message and trying to spread it, they'd be the first ones arguing for more welfare spending, not less. They'd be the first ones arguing against Israel's slaughter of Palestinians and against U.S. wars and spending trillions of dollars on foreign conflicts. They'd be in favor of paid family leave for mothers. They'd be in favor of a universal housing for all program to look after homeless people. They'd be in favor of immigration because, again, Jesus is very kind to the sojourners or the immigrants in the Bible. But down the line, so in other words, it's more of a cult of Republican politics. That's what evangelical Christianity has become. And here's somebody who's actually acting like a Christian and getting persecuted for it, and I hear fucking crickets in defense of this person. God bless this person, no pun intended, and the state better drop the charges, because this is the clearest example of religious persecution I've ever seen, and it's the clearest example of dehumanization of homeless people, where they literally care more about property and zoning laws than they do about the lives of human beings. That says a lot about how decrepit our system is right now.
That'll do it for tonight.